Hello, hello, hello. Good morning. Welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. I was just noticing the new montage there. It's very interesting. It just shows what's going on around the world and all the things that we have to deal with as human beings each and every day. So today we have a lot to talk about. Today our show is focused on Donald Trump and the impact Donald Trump is having both domestically and around the world. Now, all Nigerians and all Africans and all people around the world who are watching should pay attention today because there's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of things going on that most people would think, oh, well, that doesn't bother me. Oh, well, that doesn't impact me. Well, let me tell you, there's a lot in the details. What's the devil in the details, I think is what they say. So we have to really talk about it. And it's just not one of these situations where you say, yeah, well, it's great, America, he's doing this. But listen, for everyday Nigerians and everyone in Africa and everyone around the world and people in Taiwan and people in South America and Central America, what is happening is going to have extreme consequences. Now, if that's good or bad is up to the individual observer. But on today's show, we're going to have a special guest. We're going to walk through this. But in addition to that, I want to send out my congratulations to Beyonce. Listen, I'm not typically a big, huge Beyonce fan, but her new album, Cowboys, I think is what it's called, it's a really an amazing album. So I wish I was her agent and taking a percentage of that deal. But I want to congratulate her on her victory at the Grammys. And just a lot going on. So anyway, I won't talk too much now because there's a lot that we have to talk about with our special guest. Listen, the true sign of friendship, I will tell you, the true sign of friendship is somebody who will get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and be on my TV show. So Paul Jacob, who's been with us before, thank you, Paul, for getting up and being with us today.
Well, my pleasure. I think it shows that I'm a friend. It may also show that I'm not all together upstairs, but it's great to be on.
Well, I appreciate that. So, okay, Donald Trump. Now, let's just establish this ground rules. This is not this is going to be a fair and balanced discussion. We both have our very strong opinions about what's going on, but I really want to get through kind of the minutia and understand what's going on because he's been in office for today's the 4th, the 20th. So, I mean, 15 days, 2 weeks? Is that what it is? He's been in power for 2 weeks now? Roughly?
2 weeks yesterday, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh, seems like an eternity, and we have 4 more years to go. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this. Do you want to talk about domestic or foreign policy first?
Either one. My biggest worries with Trump are foreign policy, not domestic policy. But and I think maybe at the start, I have gone from there's things that Trump has done I've liked, there's things Trump has done I haven't liked, and I think one of the things that people may not realize is that I think the folks who have run against Trump, for instance, this last election, people like to say, well, these people just love Donald Trump. But I think that you had a lot of people vote for Trump who were more scared of the Democrats than they were of Trump, and a lot of people who voted for the Democrats who are more scared of Donald Trump than they are enamored of the Democrats.
Okay, that's a lot to take in. Especially, it's impressive you could say that at 3 o'clock in the morning. So, okay, so let's talk about domestic policy because it's going to go into foreign policy. Most of this show, 99% of the show, is all about foreign policy and what's happening around the world. But domestically, what's happening is having an impact on foreign policy. So let's talk about DOGE. What is it? Department of Governmental Efficiency, I think is what it's called.
Yes.
Elon Musk. Listen, I love the fact I want our deficit to be gone. I don't think we need to reduce the size of the U.S. government. There's no doubt about it. Okay, I agree with that 100%. But I was talking to somebody yesterday. There's various approaches, but the sledgehammer approach might not necessarily be the right way to do it. But as somebody who worked in the government, who's done a lot of work with the government, I do have some concerns about what's going on with this DOGE from the standpoint of basically abolishing USAID. Now, before we get to USAID, which impacts foreign policy, Just as he and his team. And by the way, let's establish this. Elon Musk was never certified by the Senate, by the Congress. His apartment is not it doesn't exist legally.
Right.
Elon Musk is just like, you or I as individuals going and doing this. So there's, I just want to establish that up front. Doji did not exist prior to Donald Trump, right? And so you have Elon Musk, who literally the other day went into the Department of Treasury, where 90% of all checks are paid, in the United States government, that literally somebody has to pay it and they pay it. And they demanded access to actually the list of everyone getting money in the US and around the world. I mean, literally everyone. And they're going through that list and seeing, okay, well, we like this, we don't like this, we like this, we don't like this. First of all, I have serious concerns with that. Second of all, let me ask you this question. Do you believe that what's happening with like USAID, before we talk about that specifically, and Department of Treasury and Doji, there is a separation of powers about the power of the purse. Congress appropriates funds. They have the power of the purse. Do you believe that what's going on violates in some way the separation of powers?
I don't immediately see, oh, they violated some constitutional provision or the law. Now, I'm not an attorney, and they may very well have, but I think it's classic Trump in the sense that he gets into something like this, which is we need to get government down to size and we need some accountability, and Washington is out of control, bloated. And of course, the country's with him. And not 100%, but a solid majority says it's about time somebody has gotten a handle on Washington. And they recognize that it's awfully tough to do through all the various channels. Nobody's done it. Republican after Republican says, hey, we got to cut government down to size. And this is the biggest, flashiest attempt to do that anybody's seen. So that is all on the good side. And if he's attacked on that, he wins. At the same time, I support that, but I want everything followed, by the law. For instance, one of my most troubling, when I look at what Trump's done, one of the things that troubles me most is the birthright citizenship. And not because of the concept. Someone who says, hey, we ought not to have birthright citizenship, that's a legitimate opinion, of course, as it is to say we should have it. But to say we can just repeal it, I mean, it's in the 14th Amendment, and it's very clear. And some people can argue, well, that wasn't really their intent or whatever. I think you have to read the words. So to me, a lot of what Trump is trying to do, I'm applauding. At the same time, I'm very nervous because you can't do good. You can do good by upsetting the apple cart in Washington and by irking everybody in this town. But you can't do good by violating the Constitution. You can't do good by breaking all the rules and having your own rules. And I think that's where the country will be. The more Democrats, just run around with their hair on fire saying he's a fascist and he's going to do everything terrible, the less effective they are. The more they, one of the good things about Trump being in is that the media and a lot of the government is going to be on guard. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I wish they were that way all the time. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because the public does not want Trump to violate the law. They do not want Trump to be mean or to create chaos. They do want him to cut government down to size. They do want him to take control of government and use some common sense. And I think you can see it going both ways, maybe at the same time.
Okay, this is going to get a little deep here. For Donald Trump won, I'm just rounding, he got 51% of the popular vote to 49% of the popular vote, right, for Kamala
roughly. He actually, I believe, got under 50 if you count the third party candidates.
Okay. So really it's a split when you get down to it. 50-50.
Yes.
And yes, everyone talks about this mandate. Yeah, well, he won the Electoral College, but let's just deal with rank and file Americans for a second, the popular vote. Now, I understand that when to the victor goes the spoils to some degree, that when you win, you get the ability to do whatever. But he represents all of America, not just the 50% of Americans that elected him. And listen, there's certain things like I noticed that his press secretary yesterday was coming out and talking about, we found that USAID was giving money to DEI this, doing this, and some transgender play, and where I don't know,
Well, there was the kind of suggesting that maybe it was there was a transgender pilot to the helicopter that crashed with the
right.
plane, and of course there wasn't. But even if there was, what does that mean? As if nobody who was binary sexually, gender wise, has ever crashed anything. So there is the silliness like that.
Well,
And
yeah, but my point is that when you allocate money, excuse me, I don't know, I get all choked up with you, Paul. I get all choked up. It's like when Congress appropriates funds, it appropriates funds for all of America, all of the world, right? So you're going to have in these departments, and if and where there's going to be funding for stuff that 50% of Americans want, and there's going to be some things that the other 50% want. Okay, so when you see on TV people saying, well, USAID is doing this and doing this and doing this, we have to remember that we have to govern for the entire country, and there's going to be funding going for things that I may not like, but I am not 100% of the population. So that's number one. But number two, let's get into foreign policy here because this impacts. Go ahead.
hold just 1 second, because there's an issue in terms of when Congress appropriates, can the president, and I forget the term they used to use, but basically hold that funding and say, we're not going to spend it because I'm the executive, so I don't have to spend on that, even though you appropriated it. Now, I can't take it and spend it on something else, but that was something that was done in the past. I believe the courts have come out and said, no, you can't do that. But there's a rub there, and it's why folks ought to be reasonable. Like the whole foreign aid, this will segue us into foreign policy, but for forever. I'm 65 soon, and my whole life people have complained about foreign aid. Why are we handing all this money out to foreign countries? And of course, I realize most of that money is paid to U.S. interests doing stuff in foreign countries, and it's not some giveaway that it's often portrayed to be. But that's the place. It's one reason why I think Trump is doing this with U.S. aid, because he knows there's a huge unpopularity, a really deep kind of sense in the public that we're giving all this money away. It's also that the U.S. is being taken advantage of all the time. And of course, there are times where the U.S. taxpayers are taken advantage of, but it's that's where Trump is going, because he knows the public is largely with him on that. Now, I think some of it's because they don't understand fully, but I think some of it is because they don't feel like they have any understanding or control of the federal government and the way it spends money.
But okay, so let's talk about foreign aid. Okay, USAID. Just so for our Nigerian audience, the USAID has given Nigeria $7.8 billion. Okay, they just recently there is another 567 million set aside for sub-Saharan Africa, with a huge chunk of that going to Nigeria for aid. Now, listen, I'm like you. I travel around the world. I see some aid, USAID. I see a lot of USAID people around the world. And some of the things that I'm questioning, like, why do we spend this money? Why do we do it? But it's all about, USAID was set up as the humanitarian arm of the U.S. government. Okay, it's where we, America, try to build relationships with other countries through whatever mechanism we need to, aid, support, flood control, whatever it is, whatever that aid is.
Right.
Now, unilaterally, I mean, I was I had a guest on the show 2 weeks ago, Keith Coleman, who does power energy plants in Ukraine. After the bombs come in and the infrastructure is destroyed, he rebuilds it. That contract was through USAID. Now it's been canceled. Okay. So there's no rebuilding, at least by the US government. Other countries may be doing it. There's no rebuilding of the power grid in Ukraine after the attacks. So USAID did more than just give money to plays and this kind of stuff. Now,
Right.
do you think, I know I'm talking more than usual on this show today, but do you think that it is important, and I'll come back to this, do you think it's important that the US government funds and supports countries around the world as a way to better our relations with them? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think a lot depends on how you fund it and what you're actually funding, because you don't necessarily want, like, for instance, some governments, Xi Jinping might be happy if our government did certain things. I'm never trying to make Xi Jinping happy. But I do think there's a role here. And I think part of it is that it's never explained to the public. In other words, this is the first, I have an understanding of some degree what USAID does. And I'm sure some of it I like and some of it I don't like, but it's not talked about other than as a giveaway. In other words, I didn't know that we were giving money to rebuild the energy infrastructure. To me, that's a military, a foreign policy goal that we want to happen. And I think there are people who, if you said the military was spending money in Ukraine doing this, they'd go, I'm all for that. And then you say, well, USAID is giving all this money to Ukraine and you don't know what it's giving it for. And you say, well, I'm against that. So I do think, yeah, it's a good thing very often. It's a bad thing sometimes. And it has to be tied to what our foreign policy is. What are we trying to do? And for me now, I mean, I think many years ago, people could have argued, hey, let's back off. We're way too much. We have too many bases all over the world. We're doing all these different things. And you could make an argument for, let's do less of this. Let's let people stand on their own 2 feet. If they're a good country and have good laws, they'll get a lot of private money coming in. I think there's also times when, and I think we're in one, when it's critical that countries that have the wherewithal to help defend against authoritarian regimes that are on the march. And I think it's not hard to show they are on the march, as in rolling tanks across the border in Ukraine, and as in bullying the Philippines and threatening Taiwan when you talk about China. And in those cases, of course, you got to have a whole approach to getting other countries on board and building alliances. And sometimes that means helping that country in a financial way. And I think people are for that. They're against foreign aid because they define it as throwing money at these other countries and we're not going to buy friends. And then they lump some of that in the same thing as working with Ukraine or Taiwan or the Philippines, where these countries are under enormous threat. They have moved tremendously toward freedom, but they're under threat from people who want to snuff out freedom. And so I think it explained to the public they're all for that.
Well, listen, I mean, it's like I was in Guyana down in South America once, meeting with the president there, and they had developed a very strong relationship with Russia, and I asked him why, and he said, listen, it's not that I'd necessarily like Russia. It's just that Russia is willing to give us doctors and teachers who can help our country. So of course I'm going to be more friendly to them. I don't believe in handouts, but at the same time, from a foreign policy standpoint, yes, in theory, we do have to buy friends. I mean, it's just the reality, especially in a world where the authoritarians are on the march, as you say, the bad guys are on the march. You have Russia doing so much, you got Iran doing so much, you got China doing so much. They're buying friends around the world.
Right.
And if we don't compete with that, then we're going to be left out and it's going to be us. Now, we have to take a quick break here, and I want to come back and talk about it. But let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be back with Paul Jacob. Thank you.
It's an interesting thing because so much of it's perception. It's like I talk to people all the time who, we can get into this obviously, who are anti.
Okay. Hold 1 second there. Um,
You
well, I
wonder,
don't know.
are we really
Yeah,
on a break?
I don't know if we are or not. So
Our
today's one of those.
candid conversation will be very good.
Well, listen, USAID apparently stopped the funding for Silverberg, so there's not so there's nothing going on there. But okay, so here's my fundamental question. Okay, and you and I've talked about this before, and so Donald Trump, it looks, at the end of the day, the world is a hostile place. Okay, you get, I'll say, good versus evil to break it. Okay, you get those people in Russia, Iran, North Korea, down in South America, China. I mean, you get these people who, leaders of these countries who want to, for whatever reason, want to gobble up the world, for their own benefit. Okay. Now, who stops that? There's an old saying, freedom isn't free. Okay? It isn't. And we have Donald Trump who I understand, looks at everything through an economic lens, right? Says, like, for example, he said, okay, we'll help Ukraine if they give us access to their precious minerals. We'll help Taiwan if they, or we're going to impose a tariff on Taiwan unless their chip manufacturers move to the United States. Everything's through an economic
Right.
lens. Now, okay, on one hand, that looks good, but if America is that way, if we have a president that only looks at things through an economic lens, what happens to freedom around the world? Who's protecting freedom around the world? That's a question to you.
Well, it's whoever has money. If you look at it that way, and a country like Taiwan or a more advanced country that has resources gets to be free or gets to be defended, and others don't. Um, it's funny because certainly we have to be realistic about building alliances and other people buying in. Like I hats off to Trump for jerking around NATO. And we probably disagree a little bit about that, but I'm glad he jerked around NATO because it made NATO stronger. It made them stand up. Now, if it would have caused NATO to dissolve, and 20 years ago I was opposed to the US being involved in NATO. But I look at it now and I say, look, we've had peace in Europe. It's worked. And you want to defend NATO, you want to build NATO. Now, if I were wanting to build NATO, I wouldn't have done it exactly the same way Trump did. But I also think that you can't do it sometimes you have to just say plainly, look, you got to pay up. And I look at Taiwan and I think, look, they have the ability to pay up in different ways, and they should put more into their own defense. But you also can't have this view that we can just wheel and deal our way to a free world. And as much as I know people who would argue, well, the U.S. has tried to gobble up the world. Well, our gobbling up of the world is really the U.S. having a huge role in freedom of navigation around the world and allowing every country to take their products to market without fear of pirates and foreign adversaries, and has ushered in a time in the world in which there's been a tremendous economic growth. And we blame our country, and we should, when we screw up things around the world or do something we shouldn't, but we don't credit it for literally decades of relative peace and freedom around the world that we have helped secure. And the problem I have is that's not explained to the public. I don't think the public sees what we have done successfully. They do in kind of a glorified, we're the exceptional nation and we stormed the beaches in Normandy, but that was a long time ago. And there have been U.S. military and U.S. political efforts for decades and decades since World War II that have been very, very important. And I think it's easy to dismiss those and say, oh, we're butting our noses in other people's business. I hear when it comes to Taiwan sometimes that they're caught in between two superpowers. Well, they're caught in between two superpowers. One that wants to take them over and re-educate them and crush their freedom, and the other that they're hoping will protect them. That's not a rivalry over two superpowers. So I think you're right. We have to be focused on more than just economics, because freedom is a long-term benefit that if you lose it, you can't be rich enough to want to live in a Nazi or a communist state. And no matter how rich China gets, I wouldn't want to live there where if you say the wrong thing, you're in a tiger chair in some police department. So we have to recognize that. And my biggest problem with our foreign policy is that our leaders keep saying, hey, we got this. Don't you worry your pretty little heads about it. And we're in a world that's different than we grew up in. We grew up in a world in which the U.S. was the undisputed leader. And I know the Cold War, there was the threat of Russia, but the Soviet Union was never on par with the technology and the wealth of the United States. And now China is an adversary that we have to take much more seriously. And like you say, they're buying friends all over the world. We have to counter that, and as smartly as we can.
Yeah, I mean, let's take Nigeria specifically. Okay, so $7.8 billion to Nigeria. Now, when USAID funds dry up, and we're not supporting Nigeria, whether it's through humanitarian assistance, fighting Boko Haram or whatever it may be, if all that dries up, okay, what's the president of Nigeria going to do? Just say, oh well, we give up. We're just not going to do it. No, they're going to go find other friends to give them money.
Right.
We already know that Russia is infiltrating Nigeria. We already know that.
Russia's all over Africa, and I don't think that again, that's not something that's followed much. But Russia, their impact in Africa in the last decade or so is gigantic.
Yeah, and so it's going to grow when that vacuum exists. It's going to grow, and even if it's a short period. I mean, let's say that people in Nigeria, for example, they most of them love America, but when that money dries up, and America is not there to help, the animosity toward America is definitely going to grow. There's no doubt about it, and that negative perception in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, all of South America, there's a price, sadly, there's a price to be paid to get people to like us. Just like what's happening in the United States, where
well, and I think sometimes we talk about it like to get them to like us. But of course, that's not really what we're, they might like us, they might not like us. We're trying to get them to work with us and to work as part of a kind of more free and democratic society, alliance, and so that does take something. If China and Russia were just the nicest guys in the world, then the fact that they're kind of gobbling up some countries, oh great, you guys help them. They're not nice guys. They are the forces of the old world, of a world in which everything's dominated by tyrants. So we don't want that.
Well, yeah, and listen, let's be fair. Let's be blunt about it. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea want America to disappear. Okay?
Yes.
They want America to go away. So if we allow them to build their strength around the world, that only makes it easier for them to destroy America. Okay? That's it.
Yeah.
So we have to defend against that. Most people in America think, oh, we have a great military. Well, 90% of the wars that are fought around the world are not fought on a battlefield. Okay, they are fought through foreign policy. And I will tell you from USAID standpoint, I mean, I know people talk about humanitarian aid, but USAID did a lot to support the intel community and others with funding assets and doing stuff. So USAID's lack of funding and closure is going to have a tremendous impact on America's safety and security. Forget the fact that they give to an LGBTQ play and wherever it is. Who cares? Who cares about that $20,000? But the reality and the impact of shutting down USAID is going to have a fundamental negative impact on the safety and security of the United States of America. And if we become an insulated country, an isolated country, the bad guys are going to win, and we as a country are going to lose.
I think it's a great point in that we can go after the spending on the LGBTQ play, unless it's a great play, and then we might want to go see it, and we'll pay our money. But we can cut things that are wrong. You don't want to cut the mission. And that's part of it, is that I think there has been no effort to keep the public in touch with what the mission is, or that there is a mission. During Trump's administration, Biden's administration, they've got everything under control. And the reality is they don't have everything in control. I grew up in a world in which the US was the undisputed leader. And so we were able to create a freer world. We made plenty of mistakes, but we also did some good things. And I think we have to realistically look at, what is this going to? And obviously, I think they've pulled out USAID as hey, this can be our whipping boy, without the public being aware of what it fully does. But the more the public's in on the whole thing, I feel like, look, I'm getting in an age where I'd like to, mosey off into the sunset. I don't think we can mosey off to the sunset, because the world has changed. And if we don't get active and do the right stuff, we are going to lose the world. And what I mean by that, Dane, and I know you're with me on this, I know people who, well, what if China takes Taiwan? Big deal. That's one country. I mean, it's sad for the 24 million people who live there, but we can't solve every problem. What's the big deal? And the big deal is, but it won't really affect the U.S. Well, it's not just the chips, which will affect the U.S. and the whole world if China's in control of Taiwan and Taiwan's not free. But it's also the strategic importance of Taiwan. I don't know how we defend the Philippines, which we have pledged by treaty we will do, or how we defend Japan if Japan and the Philippines are separated and surrounded by the biggest navy in the world. And so there's this thought that we can just step back. Well, what kind of economy are we going to have if we can't trade in Asia? If we've got to pay China a bounty every time we cross the South China Sea, their ocean. I mean, we're headed to a place where, and look at the balloon that flies across the country from China, or what's happening in the Arctic. This is not about us just helping the poor people of Taiwan because we're really thoughtful, wonderful people. That all may be true, but we're helping, or should be helping, Taiwan and the Philippines and some of these other countries, Ukraine, because if we don't, we're looking at a world war, and we're looking at the possibility of a much poorer U.S. that doesn't have not just the influence, but even the ability to trade in parts of the world. This is not the world we want to go to. We've gone to a world where people can trade freely all over. We don't want to go back.
Well, listen, I mean, the reason I'm not going to, there's so much to say here. Let's talk about China for a second. Okay. Okay, so tariffs, and I'm not going to get in the whole basis of tariffs or right, wrong, or indifferently, whatever, but okay, 25% on Mexico, 25% on Canada, 10% on China. Okay, now I'm gonna say my 2 cents worth on this. China is the big bad evil, evil person in the room, right? Okay, and if I'm an American, I'm thinking, 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico, 10% on China. Well, what's up with that? I don't understand that. Well, listen, let's live in a world where we understand that Elon Musk's largest factory for Tesla is located in China. Let's live in that world, okay? And let's live in the world also where the other thing I want to ask you about is that he put out a tweet the other day, Elon Musk, saying that USAID funded the creation of COVID-19, or whatever he said about COVID-19. Listen, we have to live in a world where this guy, Elon Musk, and he's 360 billion, so I'm going to give him all the accolades in the world for creating. I mean, listen, I got $360, he's got 360 billion, so I got to cut him some slack on that. But the reality is, we have this guy who is not appointed by, he's chosen by Donald Trump, not vetted, has passed no security clearances. Let's remember, he's not an American citizen by birth. He's not. He was born in a foreign country. Not that I'm making an issue of that. And yet he's over there saying, okay, hey, let's lessen the tariffs on China. Let's not accuse China of COVID-19. Let's say that it was done by USAID. I mean, what's going on? I just don't understand what's going on.
Well, and it is a problem. Like certainly, Elon Musk is free to do whatever he wants to do. You don't have to be a citizen to get involved in different things. But it is troubling that there's not a process and that he's not really vetted in any way. Elon Musk is a brilliant guy. I have lauded him for a long time because of SpaceX and other stuff. Hats off to him. But a couple of years ago, he suggested, this is after the Chinese, the CCP just obliterated freedom in Hong Kong, violated the treaty that they made with the agreement they made with Britain and they made with the people of Hong Kong. After all of that, Musk suggests that Taiwan ought to just cut a deal and they can have a two countries, one system or whatever, one country, two systems, just like Hong Kong. I mean, he was absolutely clueless. So let's face it, brilliant people can be incredibly stupid. But here is the sort of thing that troubles me. The whole COVID-19 thing, Anthony Fauci is beloved by much of America and hated by much of America, but it's never really come out, I think, in the way it should, how much he tried to block the lab leak theory of the origin of COVID. Well, why would he do that? Well, because he did send millions of dollars to that Chinese lab. And the U.S. does have some responsibility for whatever might have happened in that lab. At the same time, why was it a big problem? Because China has never complained with what it did. So, yeah, there's blame, not on USAID. That's not where anything happened. That's insanity. But there is blame, I think, with NIH and with the medical community in the United States, the government part, for funding that. But that shouldn't relieve one bit of what China did, which was have a virus come out, lie about it, can lock down their country, even while they sent people overseas continuing with a pandemic underway. I mean, China is such a bad actor, and I give Trump a huge amount of credit for blowing up our completely stupid relationship with China, empowering them, that has been president after president after president. At the same time, it's easy to realize that Trump doesn't quite get it. He wants to be friendly with Xi Jinping, and I'm not talking about, friendly and nice, but because you can always meet somebody, you don't have to be rude. But China is a cancer on the world, and we've got to stop it. And so it is scary that I think kind of a more transactional approach, all of that tells me he doesn't fully see the danger in front of him. And I think much of our country does not see that danger.
Well, I don't think that. Well, first of all, let me go back. I want to clarify this as far as USAID and other government agencies. The director of USAID doesn't wake up in the morning and say, "Hey, I've got all this money. I'm just going to go spend it." Okay. All the funds that go to these agencies are approved and appropriated by Congress, Republicans and Democrats. Okay. All, USAID, because I've been part of this process, submits a budget to Office of Management Budget, OMB. They vet it. The White House then submits that budget. The White House submits the budget to Congress, and Congress decides. So all the funding that's being spent around the world by USAID was approved by Congress. Republicans voted for it. I'm not saying all of them. Democrats voted for it. I'm not saying all of them. But let's just remember, this is not some rogue organization that's deciding how to spend money. And this is what bothers me about this process. It's like, and I just take issue with the fact of, like Donald Trump yesterday talking about how evil these people are at USAID. It's a criminal organization. It's this, it's that. Listen, I've done work for USAID. USAID also funds the International Republican Institute. It funds NDI. It funds a lot of pro-democracy organizations around the world. And so these are not evil people.
NDI being the National Democratic Institute,
right,
which is
the counter to IRI. So all those things exist. But I will say that in closing, because sadly we only have another minute here, but what I want to leave the show for the world to think about is that, we are in a crux of a war between good versus evil, and I'll put it that way. And I don't want to say just necessarily East versus West, but you got evil out there: China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. I mean, whatever you want to say. There's evil out there with a number one mission to destroy America. Okay?
Yes.
If America, I understand America first. I want America to be great. I want us to reduce our debt. I want all those things as well. But if we lose sight of what our responsibility is around the world and what we need to do to fight evil, we will be consumed. And if we're consumed and we're not around to protect countries like Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa and others, the world as we know it, you're right, we're going to be living in a police state globally. So give me your last 20 seconds of thoughts, Paul.
Well, we need the American people to be invited to think about all these things, because from a media and political standpoint, they're not. The powers that be are scared. We might not agree. This next decade, these next few years are hugely crucial. And I don't trust Donald Trump to solve these problems. I don't trust the Democrats to solve these problems. Congress, like you say, has been involved in all of this stuff, has signed off on it, and then they do nothing but bitch and complain and act like it wasn't their fault. The public, though, will get, and I think increasingly is getting, how dangerous the world is. We have leaders who I don't think quite get that. I'm still hopeful that that a lot of this will work out. I think Donald Trump's crazy, kind of method is successful sometime, but unless the public is really engaged and recognizes this moment in the world, we're in trouble. And this is not a moment of the U.S. can reassert its world domination. This is a moment in which we can connect with other countries and reduce some of our burdens, but only by creating real alliances. And that means, dress down NATO, but then love them, because we're all in this together. This is not the world it was in the 1930s or 1950s. This is a world in which we're too small and people are too connected, not for the U.S. not to use its position to keep a world in which there's a lot of freedom, growing wealth, and the ability to trade that there won't be if the authoritarians take over.
Well, Paul, I appreciate you being with us today. I really just always a pleasure. And I'll just close by saying freedom isn't free. Let's remember that. Freedom isn't free. And the whole world needs to understand that. So, but anyway, thanks for being here. I appreciate you getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And thanks for being with Dane Waters, with Around the World with Dane Waters. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you very much.